Welcome to this tutorial on integrating sources into academic writing presented by the Gaston College Writing Center. Does the idea of incorporating sources into your own writing through summarizing, paraphrasing, and quoting have you feeling stressed out and overwhelmed? This tutorial will help you start strong. To learn about all the ways to integrate sources, watch this tutorial in its entirety. If you want to focus on learning how to integrate quotes, jump to the midpoint of this video around minute 7. Incorporating sources into your academic writing helps you develop stronger arguments and critical thinking skills by requiring you to consider how existing concepts and theories counter or enhance your own ideas. Incorporating sources is essential to introducing your reader to concepts with which they may be unfamiliar. Furthermore, summarizing and paraphrasing helps writers provide context and background information on their topic. Direct quotes especially help with providing support for your argument, demonstrating different perspectives, and strengthening the credibility of your argument by providing source material from experts in the field or a piece of literature that is under examination. Knowing when to use each method of integrating sources can be tricky, so let's break that down a bit. With summary, you want to focus on condensing the content of long passages that there is no need to quote directly. Summary is particularly important when there are a lot of unnecessary details that you need to leave out and the original wording is not essential to the understanding of the passage. When paraphrasing, focus on passages that have specific details that are important to your topic, but direct quotes are not needed. Paraphrasing also helps integrate important concepts more seamlessly because you maintain the flow of your own tone and diction. Using direct quotes can be difficult, but they have the power to enhance the strength and quality of your argument, especially if the original language is so powerful and unique that paraphrasing or summarizing would be a disservice to the original content. Quoting places special emphasis on the author's opinions and is particularly important if the author is a renowned representative or innovator within their field. Directly quoting an author whose position conflicts with your own, especially if that opinion is in opposition to others in the field, can help you establish effective refutations to counter arguments without feeling pressured to paraphrase a perspective you disagree with. Summary is pretty simple. Think of this as your go-to for providing the reader with context and a foundation for understanding your argument or the piece of literature you are analyzing. You should introduce the work and the author, then use your own language to explain critical points. When summarizing, be sure to open with essential information such as the author or authors, the title of the work, the date if the currency of the work is relevant to your argument, and the main goal, idea, or point you aim to communicate. As you move further into summarizing, make sure to address critical plot points, explain main ideas as thoroughly as necessary, and mention any other details important to your own argument. Remember, you should always use your own words and cite as necessary. For an example of a student summary of an assigned text, see page 104 in the Everyday Writer, 6th edition. Paraphrasing can be challenging because it requires the writer to convey specific details and ideas in their own words, but thinking of this as an opportunity to be creative while incorporating sources can make the process of paraphrasing more engaging. Paraphrasing is perfect for those situations in which you feel like a direct quote would be too wordy or that it would interrupt the flow or affect the tone of your paper. Moreover, good paraphrasing demonstrates understanding of a topic through your effective rephrasing of primary source material. Ultimately, the goal is to change the wording and the word order while maintaining the original idea presented in the passage, all without plagiarizing, so make sure to cite your source appropriately. Let's look at an example of how to paraphrase effectively. We'll start by looking at this passage from Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451 with an important idea that should be paraphrased to fit into a paper. A book is a loaded gun in the house next door. Burn it. Take the shot from the weapon. Breach man's mind. Who knows who might be the target of a well-read man? Me? I won't stomach them for a minute. And so when houses were finally fireproofed completely all over the world, you were correct in your assumption the other night. There was no longer need of firemen for the old purposes. They were given the new job as custodians of our peace of mind, the focus of our understandable and rightful dread of being inferior, official censors, judges, and executors. The writer has paraphrased this passage as follows. In Bradbury's dystopia, censorship has become an integral part of society, with the role of firemen shifting from fighting fires to starting them by burning books, the contraband of the mind in a society in which education, minorities, and disparate opinions are viewed as a hindrance to happiness, and knowledge is a weapon to be controlled. Open parentheses, 60, close parentheses, period. At first glance, we can see that the paraphrase is much shorter than the original, which is one of the primary goals of paraphrasing because it is neither possible nor effective to directly quote all of the information essential to an argument. This is a good example of paraphrasing because the writer opened with a brief introductory phrase that situates the reader by providing context, including the author's name and a description of the setting of the book. Furthermore, this writer condensed a lot of information into a sentence that gets to the heart of the issue presented in the original text. The writer also uses their own language to communicate this idea that is essential to their argument. Also note how the writer focused on the idea of censorship and how and why it is enforced, rather than summarizing the action of the passage. While some of the language is similar, the reorganization of the information and the way the language is presented to set up an argument that the writer is defending means this is paraphrase and not plagiarism. Incorrectly paraphrasing a passage may lead to unintentional plagiarism. A writer commits plagiarism when they present another's information as their own, or they fail to effectively reword and reorder. The original states, "You could feel the war getting ready in the sky that night." The attempted paraphrase says, "Montauk felt the war preparing in the sky that night." Open parentheses, Bradbury, 91, close parentheses, period. For many students, their first attempt at paraphrasing results in something like this, so let's analyze it. Looking at this example, we can immediately see direct similarities between the original quote and the attempted paraphrase. The words war, night, and sky are directly taken from the original, while felt and preparing are too close to the original to be considered acceptable. A tip for checking your paraphrase for plagiarism is to directly compare your work to the original. If you see the exact same words or synonyms plugged into the sentence, you'll probably need to revise further. Let's transition and focus on incorporating direct quotes into academic writing. Using direct quotes requires work, but the process can be broken down into 3 simple steps that some instructors call a quote sandwich because the quote should be the filling between your own idea and explanation of that idea. As you move through this process, remember that you should aim to use the quote as evidence, not as an unnecessary detail. First, you want to introduce the quote. You can do this by setting the quote up with an argumentative claim and by providing necessary background information. However, you should avoid simple summary. This helps to ensure the reader knows why the quote is relevant before delving into the quoted material. Once you've established a foundation, integrate your quote. You can do this by using an introductory phrase to set the quote up and concluding with an in-text citation, or you can integrate the quote as its own sentence, concluding with an in-text citation, assuming you have introduced the quote effectively in the sentence directly before the quoted material. Finally, explain why this quote matters and what it contributes to your overall argument. When writing your explanation, consider the following questions. Does the quote support your point by endorsing your argument? Or does the quote go against your position, requiring you to refute a claim or opinion represented by the quote? How does the quote impact your claim? What does this quote, in its exact wording, contribute to what you are trying to communicate to your reader? By ensuring that your explanation answers one or more of these questions, you are guaranteeing that you have accomplished the goal of effectively integrating a quote into your argument. If you find yourself stuck, these templates for introducing quotes can be useful for writers of all skill levels. Because these templates by They Say, I Say are so generic and frequently used, employing them in your own writing is not plagiarism, it is merely a matter of learning the most common tools of quote integration. We'll go over these together, but feel free to pause the video and copy them down for future use. As the prominent philosopher X puts it, according to X, writing in the journal Commentary, X complains that, in X's view, X disagrees when he writes, and X complicates matters further when she writes, are all strong ways to introduce quotes in your academic writing. If you need a little push to help explain your quote, the following templates from They Say, I Say can get you started. Be sure to follow each template with your explanation of the quoted material. In other words, X believes. In making this comment, X argues that. X is insisting that. X's point is that. And the essence of X's argument is that are all great ways to initiate your explanation of the quote you've integrated. Again, feel free to pause the video and copy these down for future use. Let's look at an example of a poorly integrated quote using Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. Censorship is deadly. They fell like slaughtered birds, and the woman stood below like a small girl among the bodies. Failing to act and assuming the role of bystander in times of crisis leads to rising death tolls. This is not effective because the writer has established no context for the reader, and the quote is not explained clearly. The introduction, "Censorship is deadly," is alarming and does not effectively establish a foundation for the reader to understand the quote. Without background information, the reader does not know that "they" in the context of this quote refers to books and may assume something more literal like the burning of people. The explanation following the quote reads more like a claim that could be supported by the quote. However, the writer has tacked this to the end of the quote and did not provide enough explanation to effectively communicate and defend their claim. Additionally, the quotation is formatted incorrectly because the reader is unable to tell which piece of this passage is actually quoted, and the writer failed to provide an in-text citation. Therefore, this is also plagiarism. When integrating sources into your academic work, revision is your friend. Get a draft on the page and revise if you notice that you need to provide more support for your quote or if you need a stronger claim to introduce the quote. Let's look at how the writer revised their first attempt at quote integration. Failing to act and assuming the role of bystander in times of crisis may lead to rising death tolls. As Montague watches a woman burn with her house and her books, he describes the loss like one would describe an apocalyptic scene, comparing the books to living beings. Open quotation. They fell like slaughtered birds, and the woman stood below, like a small girl among the bodies. Close quotation. Open parentheses, Bradbury, 37, close parentheses, period. By using this simile that gives life to books, Bradbury illustrates the link between censorship and violent oppression. He is showing how censorship can be deadly, especially as those who have the power to stop an unjust situation choose to observe injustice instead of taking action against it. Here we can see that the writer has made their claim and set up the quote with a brief introduction. This quote has been integrated quite seamlessly by following the introduction, and it is properly punctuated and is accompanied by the appropriate in-text citation to ensure the writer has not plagiarized the original text. In the explanation of the quote, the writer points out how the author's view supports the writer's claim by explaining the connection between Bradbury's use of simile and censorship as oppression. The writer explains the connection even further, making this an especially effective integration. Finally, let's go over a few tips for avoiding plagiarism. Plagiarism is often accidental, so make sure to use in-text citations when using the various methods of integrating sources. Always use quotation marks when directly quoting a source. If you copy a sentence or phrase word for word, or you simply copy and paste a piece of text, then this needs to be indicated with quotation marks because it is not your original work. If you are unsure about your paraphrase or summary, compare it word by word to the original. If it seems too similar and you see a lot of the same words or synonyms of those used in the original, this means you should revise your work further to avoid plagiarism. Always, if in doubt, cite your source. It is better to be overly cautious and cite something that it might have been unnecessary to cite than to not cite and be accused of plagiarism.